Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to share something deeply personal with you. It's the story of how I escaped from emotional eating. It is a journey of self-discovery, of healing, and of finding peace with food eventually. If you've ever felt trapped by emotional eating or struggled with your relationship around food, this video is for you. Let's rewind to when I was 20 years old, which is 37 years ago. At 20 years old, I weighed 20 stone, which is 280 pounds. Food was the centre of my life. It wasn't just nourishment or something I enjoyed. Food was my answer to everything. When I was anxious, food. When I was upset, food. Lonely, bored, stressed, you guessed it, food. Food was my friend and my enemy. Food was my playground and my battleground. It was my peace and my distress. It was my addiction or my drug. And ironically, it was also my medicine. I will explain why that is a wee bit later on. You see, food was never just food to me. It wasn't just a pleasant fuel to keep me going. It was a coping mechanism. It was how I navigated life's ups and downs. Chocolate cake wasn't just a mix of flour and sugar and butter and chocolate. It was a way to suppress emotions I did not want to face. I didn't know how to manage those feelings. And honestly, I didn't want to feel them. So I used food to achieve this strange and welcome numbness. But that numbness came at a price. For a long time, I played the role of Jolly Jilly. I was always happy, always smiling, and I was a people pleaser. On the outside, I looked like I had it all together. But inside, food was how I negotiated my life. It was my shield, it was my crutch, it was my survival tool, it was my coping mechanism. And this is why emotional eating can be so tricky to stop, but it is possible. As you'll gather, I loved food a lot, and I hated it too. And it is fair to say that my relationship with food was pretty messed up. You see, food carried an emotional charge for me. It represented love, comfort, and relief. It became an anesthetic for the painful or uncomfortable feelings that were ever present in my life. It helped me avoid feeling the hard stuff. And many of these feelings stemmed from my family context. You see, I grew up with a parent who struggled with mental health issues, which often made life feel unpredictable and insecure. At its worst, it could even be frightening. I lived with a constant fear around my mum's well-being and her safety. Even as a child, I absorbed the emotions of others deeply. I felt my mum's pain as if it were my own. Wonder why I became a therapist. I wanted to help, and in doing so, my role often shifted from being the child to being the sounding board, and at times even stepping into the role of parenting my parent. Through no fault of anyone's, the natural order became distorted, and this left gaps in my emotional development. For instance, my sense of safety, the secure foundation that we all need, was compromised. And as a result, I often didn't feel secure or safe emotionally within myself. Now, one common symptom of this was persistent anxiety. Because of the family dynamics, I hid it. And so I turned to food to find comfort and grounding. In some inexplicable way, a full stomach or even the act of eating made me feel grounded. It calmed the whirlwind of anxiety within me that raced around my mind and through my body. Well, at least for a while. At 20 years old, I decided to change things and I went on a very strict diet. Don't like the word, don't like diets. But back then, I still believe food was the sole issue. Today, I prefer to follow a really balanced, healthy approach to eating rather than committing to rigid diets. At the time, I thought that dieting was the best way to lose weight. I had strong willpower, and as the pounds came off, the results motivated me to keep going. My approach was far from sensible. I focused solely on avoiding calories, watching the numbers go down on the scale with no thought about the nutritional value of the foods I consumed or what my body needed to function. I lacked the understanding I have now of nutrition and of the psychological and emotional roots that underpinned my binges and my compulsive eating. In my 20-year-old mind, success meant eating as little as possible. My plan, actually, don't you hate it when people do that? My plan often involved lettuce, cottage cheese, and grapefruits. Some days I would avoid food as much as possible. And then as I'd skip lunch, I would have a chocolate biscuit, which was less calories than lunch. It wasn't a good plan, and it certainly was not a sustainable plan. I lost 28 pounds, but the extreme calorie deficit and the lack of nourishment and just how strict it was caught up with me. Inevitably, I regained the weight and then some more. This wasn't the first time yo-yo dieting had been part of my life. And like every time before, it left me feeling hopeless and stuck. I blamed myself. I felt guilty. I judged myself as a failure, as someone who lacked willpower and someone who was simply greedy. If you have ever been there, you know how soul-crushing it can feel. I began to think I didn't deserve to lose weight or to feel healthier or to be happier in my body. In my mind, the bottom line was I was a failure, dreadfully faulty in some way that I was deeply ashamed of. And so I slipped back into the jolly jelly persona, telling myself and others things I didn't wholly believe, like, oh, life's too short to not have cake when you want it. It was a coping mechanism, masking the deep frustration, shame, guilt, and despair I felt inside. Just before I turned 21, I decided to embark on a more sensible eating plan paired with regular exercise. I let go of the fantasy of a quick fix, the idea of a fairy godmother appearing, waving her sparkly wand and making me suddenly slimmer. I stopped chasing those instant solutions and I chose the long-term path instead. It wasn't an easy realization, but the truth was that it had taken years to reach that weight, and I finally accepted that it would take time, maybe even years, to lose it in a healthy and a sustainable way, so it stayed off. Did that acceptance feel good? No, not at all. It was frustrating to let go of that magical thinking, but it was also liberating because accepting reality allowed me to take control. During that time, I faced some health challenges with an autoimmune disease, and the treatment for which was steroids. This impacted my weight, and exercise was not always possible. And this delayed my weight loss and stalled some of my progress addressing my emotional eating. Despite the setbacks, by the age of 26, I'd lost 120 pounds. A realistic, sensible, yes, I know we all hate that word, approach to food was absolutely crucial. That was one of the key things that made it work for me. As I started eating more nutrient-dense foods that weren't loaded with fat, sugar, or salt, my taste began to change. Fruits and vegetables became more enjoyable, and my perception of sweetness shifted with less processed food in my diet. Foods like ripe pineapple tasted really, really sweet and satisfying. And unlike a Snickers bar, don't worry, I still enjoy chocolate. I'm not a healthy eating saint. The difference was that my taste buds, my palate had kind of adapted. And something like pineapple instead of a Snickers bar is that it has vitamins, it has minerals, it has fiber, which slowed down the absorption of the sugar in it and reduced the intensity of the sugar spike. It's worth saying that sugary foods like a Snickers bar, on the other hand, cause a rapid spike in your blood sugar, triggering a surge of insulin to bring it down. And this often results in a sudden drop that leaves you feeling hungry, craving more sugary foods and high carb foods. It's a cycle I knew all too well. Been there, done that, got the t-shirt. You might have that t-shirt too. Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. Okay, back to me. Over time, my palate shifted towards cleaner, more nutrient-dense foods, and gradually I began eating more of these, while the high sugar, low nutrition snacks started to become less appealing, which was gobsmacking to me. I was amazed that this happened. I also kept my focus on where I was headed. I'd never been slim, not since probably the age of 7. In fact, the last time I wore a bikini, I was 5 years old. So it was hard for me to visualize myself as a slimmer version of me. So instead, I focused on the feelings inside, the feelings I wanted to experience. I imagined just my face, a bit slimmer, smiling, calm, confident, and much happier. I pictured the joy of trying on clothes and having them fit beautifully. There was one dress I had in mind. I envisaged it hanging on my wardrobe door, just ready to be worn. And actually, a few years after that, I bought a dress really like it. And boy, did I love wearing it. So even if you can't imagine yourself slimmer, try and focus on the emotions, the happiness, the sense of achievement, the relief of no longer seeing food as the enemy. Picture yourself taking back control, where food is simply a pleasant fuel, something you can enjoy without it controlling you. If this feels difficult, don't worry. Just keep practicing that visualizing, that imagining. Like anything else, it takes time, but it is worth the effort. Now, another key breakthrough occurred for me when I had lost the weight, but I was aged 29. And I started training as a therapist. And during that time, I uncovered something that changed everything for me because it made it so much easier to keep the weight off. Because I realized that my relationship with food wasn't entirely the problem. It was a symptom of something deeper. And that thing was I didn't know how to self-regulate. So what's self-regulation? It's the ability to calm and soothe ourselves, especially if we're triggered by something stressful. Now, that could be a big thing. You could be driving along and someone pulls out in front of you. Or it could be that you know there's a conflict brewing with someone. Or it could just be everyday anxieties, the bills coming in, kids not happy. For most people, this is something you learn growing up, often from the adults around you. But for me, somewhere along the way, I missed it. And instead, I turned to food. And you know what? Looking back now, I choose to be kind to that younger version of me. As children, we all do our best to cope. For me, food became a resourceful way to find comfort and safety when I didn't have other tools. If you've been there, or if you're there right now, please hear me when I say this. You're not broken. You're not weak. You're human. We all find ways to survive, and sometimes those ways involve food. The turning point for me was learning that I didn't have to stay stuck in that cycle of finding it hard to regulate myself and fighting not to eat, not to put the weight back on. I started to explore healthier ways to self-regulate, to soothe my emotions, to calm my nervous system down, and to truly feel my feelings no matter how messy they were, and they were messy. It wasn't easy, but step by step, I built a new relationship with food. I began to see it as a fuel, as nourishment, not as a tool for numbing or avoiding. And most importantly, I learned to extend grace to myself in the process. I'm going to talk in future videos about how we can self-regulate, and I'm going to show you the most effective tool I've ever learned for it, for regulating. So as I round up, I want to say, if you're on a similar journey, let me encourage you. It is possible to break free from emotional eating. It takes patience, it takes kindness, and a willingness to face what's beneath the surface. But I promise you, it's worth it. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, or if you have your own experiences with emotional eating, I'd love to hear them in the comments. Let's support one another on this path of healing. Please don't forget to subscribe, like, and share if you find this useful. And together, let's create a space where we all feel seen, supported, and empowered. Next time, I'm going to share with you my top 12 tips that were instrumental in me escaping emotional eating, losing 120 pounds, and keeping it off. See you next time. Bye for now.